Hi, everybody. I'm Pam Dingle from the Program Committee, and I have two PSAs, which you've almost certainly heard, but I will repeat anyway. You need to be able to log into the app and connect to this session in order to be able to participate in the online Q&A, and also to be able to give a survey at the end. And the surveys, of course, are very, very important for us. It lets us know what you liked, what you'd like to see more of, and so on. One last thing, if you want to do this, just know you could apply to speak next year at Authenticate. So we want you, we would love to have new voices, so make sure you think about that. And without further ado, I am going to introduce you to Bill Frisch from Prove. I almost said it wrong anyway. There you go. Come on up, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, my presence here is evidence that they let anybody do this, so don't worry. You know, if you have a topic, by all means, please volunteer. It's always good to hear different voices and have different people's perspectives and opinions, and hopefully you'll get something out of this session. So, my name is Bill Fish, and I have to say, Authenticate is the perfect conference for me. I'm very anti-phishing, you know. Sorry, I couldn't help it. We had the coleslaw joke on the first day, so I had to come up with something. I work at Prove Identity. I've been there for a few years now. Before that, I spent, over 10 years at Verizon, so in a telco environment. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about how some of the things that MNOs offer can help really improve the identity binding process. So the title of the talk is Unshackling Passkeys, which is a little dramatic, to be fair. But the underlying premise is that with strong identity binding, it really does unlock a lot of use cases that, you know, maybe we're not as confident in today using the methods that we have, or the processes by which you do your identity binding tend to have a whole lot of friction and keep people out, or really just keep it from taking off. So that's why this session is part of the futures track here. So I'm gonna, I already did the introduction, you saw that. I'm gonna walk you through the identity and authentication lifecycle. Some of that isn't gonna be a particular surprise to the group of people here. We have a lot of experts. They know what this is, but it's helpful just to kind of reorient. Then we'll talk a little bit about the current methods for digital identity verification, some of the challenges that you have with those. And then we're going to talk about how do we then bridge the physical and the digital world. Spoiler alert, mobile phones are still a very good way to do that, and I'll talk you through in the next section around phone intelligence and how that helps create a strong bind of the identity. Now, if you weren't here in the previous session, I highly recommend Rue from Dashlane did a really good job explaining kind of how the password managers are handling some of I would call the middle bit. But this is a common theme that I think you've probably heard throughout the conference. Identity binding and account recovery are really important processes to get right, because all of this really rests on no matter how good of an authentication protocol you have, it always rests on the identity. How did you do the identity verification? How did you do the binding? How do you actually know who it is behind the passkey that you're putting forward for authentication? So, the identity and authentication lifecycle, I do not pretend by any means, by the way, to be a designer, so it's very, please forgive me and bear with me on my design skills. But anytime a new user shows up at your service, the first thing you want to do is, well, who is this that I'm talking to, right? You may not need to do that the very first thing when they show up, but anytime you want to do a transaction or create a relationship, the first thing you're going to do is, how do I make sure I know who I'm talking to in a confident way that I can then rely on for future transactions? So when you do that identity verification, we'll talk a little bit, I don't want to give it away too much up front, but when you complete the identity resolution verification process, you need to make sure that you're establishing your authentication credentials as closely tied to that event as possible. Again, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody in this room, but when I was at, so I think I said I was at Verizon for 10 years before I joined Prove. One of the challenges we had, and this is years ago, and this is the example that I like to use, is you could go into a store, you would buy a phone, get a new account set up, and I don't know if anybody remembers this, but you could set up a 4-digit PIN. And that 4-digit PIN, you could call into a call center, you would go home and you essentially create your username password on your computer at home. But this may not be a shock to any of you. A lot of people never actually did anything with that 4-digit PIN. They never went home and set up their digital credentials. So there was this 4-digit PIN kicking around that could, because we use SMS OTP, it could ruin your life, right? You could log in, if I had had your 4-digit PIN, I could have gone in and I could have set up an account and I could have, SIM swapped you, I could have ported your phone, I could have done a whole slew of bad things. Now, to be fair, a lot of advancements have happened in that area, so that's not as easy, but the underlying premise is you really do need to create your credential as tightly tied to the identity verification as possible. That way you can use it in a confident way for subsequent events. Now, the use cases that I particularly care about and that we care about at Prove are more on the high-risk, high-value use cases. So a lot of our customers are financial, healthcare, and so this process is really with that in mind. So when you issue your credentials, which we all know is going to be a passkey, the next step in the cycle is really, okay, you're just regular use of that passkey for authentication. Everything's great. Everybody's happy. We all love it. Increased adoption of passkeys. But I dropped my phone in the ocean. What happens then, right? This is the big question. This is what Rue was talking about in the last session. Again, highly recommend. But account recovery is really the next frontier of, we want to have a consistent way of doing it, but it is really a major problem that we need to have a better answer for, particularly in the high-value use cases. Because if you're thinking about the future, if you're thinking about some of the use cases that are really going to be innovative and have a lot of value, we really need to solve this problem. I also recommend, and I'm not like an Authenticate marketing person by any stretch of the imagination, but we've had a lot of great content. There was a session yesterday by Kelly Robinson of Twilio that outlined a lot of the different options for account recovery. Lots of pros and cons. It was really good. So if you haven't seen it, highly recommend you check that out online when that's available. But she went through how some of the higher risk, higher value use cases, all the way through to things like retail, which have a higher tolerance for fraud and maybe a lower barrier to recovery because they're all about getting throughput. So check that out. But account recovery is essentially, it's another it's another authentication event. That's how the user is thinking about it. The user's not thinking, oh, I need to verify my identity. No user really thinks like that, even though that's how I think. But no user's thinking that. It's actually an authentication event, so it needs to be as easy as possible, because what you really don't want is you don't want your users dropping out at that step. You've already spent all the time, all the money acquiring that customer, getting them into your service. You don't want to lose them at this moment of account recovery, which for them is just, I'm just trying to do what I'm what I'm here to do, right? So what is the method that we generally tend to fall back on today, especially for high-value use cases? Well, it's digital document verification for the most part. That's the first thing that we go to is, oh, well, let me pull out my driver's license or passport, let me scan that. And I by no means want to downplay the importance of digital document verification. There's value in it. It has its place in the ID and auth journey, but there are challenges with it. And one of the biggest challenges, which I put at the end, which I probably should have put at number one, is friction, right? The process of pulling out a document, the process of scanning it, doing the live, face scan. Some people just won't do it, right? What is this? I don't understand what's going on. Or if it doesn't work the first time, what are they going to do? They're going to call you up, right? And I know anybody who has any interaction with whoever leads your call center is not going to be happy about that, right? So can we do this in a way that is, less friction? It's easier to do. There are also, again, this is the not new to this audience, but there are challenges coming down the pipeline, particularly for digital document verification, whether that's the quality of the documents, but primarily things like deep fakes and the rise of AI, the things that we used to be able to rely on, we just can't to the same degree anymore. And, that's okay. It's still, again, it's part of the process. But if you have good users coming through your pipeline, you don't want to put them through friction-filled processes that are subject to being faked, and you want to not incur that additional cost. So again, I don't want to sound like I'm putting down document verification. There's definitely a place for it, but it does introduce a process that you would like to avoid if you can. So if you have good users coming through, a vast majority of your users who get stuck at this process are actually legitimate, good users. So how can you do this in a much more seamless way? How do you bridge that divide between the physical and the digital to enable a more seamless experience? And that's back to the good old mobile phone. Now, I will talk a little bit about some of the challenges around mobile devices too. So I really wish there was a silver bullet that would answer every single question, every problem, right? But there isn't, right? But when was the last time you were, more than 6 feet away from your mobile phone? Not counting the shower. Hopefully you took a shower. But it's not very often, right? I sleep next to my phone. I wake up. I'm probably addicted to it. My wife would tell you I'm addicted to it. My kids would tell you I'm addicted to it. I would say they're addicted to it as well. But it's all a part of our daily lives. 85% of adults in the US have smartphones. It's similar in other countries as well. That stat is actually 2 years old, so it's probably even more than that now. 11 to 12 years old is the average age when kids get their first phone. I know in our house, my daughter was asking me for one well before that, so I imagine that stat's going to come down over time. Little side note, we gave her a house phone, so I can take it back anytime I want. So recommend that as a process if you have kids. Americans check their phones 96 times a day. I don't know if you, like I have an iPhone, so I have the little counter that tells me how many times I picked up the phone today. Never look at it, very depressing. But that's the average number, and my number would probably be a lot higher than that. And this next point is really the underlying premise of why the mobile device is a good central point for doing identity binding and particularly account recovery as well. It is based on a cryptographic key. So your mobile phone has a SIM card. The SIM card has an encrypted key on it, and that talks to the mobile network operator. And that's how your phone calls get routed. That's how the data sessions you're engaged in get to your phone. It's based on that connection between that encrypted key via the SIM and the mobile tower. So that's based on essentially the network infrastructure that makes it all work. And trust me, your M&O wants to figure out how to bill you, so they do this very well, right? So all that to say, all those things together mean that your mobile phone really is the best proxy for you in the digital world. So with that being said, well, okay, we know there are challenges. We know there are why isn't SMS OTP, the conference we're all here for, right? We're here for passkeys. OTPs have their challenges. But using the mobile phone to bind, we at Prove have a methodology, we call it PRO, so possession, reputation, and ownership. And the proof of possession really is I'm holding that cryptographic key, that SIM card. And how do I prove that? Well, SMS OTP is one way of proving that I'm in control of the mobile phone number. And actually, it's an important call out as well. An OTP doesn't prove possession of a specific phone. It proves control of a phone number, right? So the fact that I can receive that OTP means that I am in control of 555-1212, right? So the first one is SMS OTP. The second You could do something like a magic link to via text message. Now, the advantage of that is you have more signals that you can see around that link click that allow you in step 2, which I'll get to, have a better understanding of what's going on with the phone to make better decisions about whether I should continue with this event or not. But the third one, which is frankly my favorite, it's what we call mobile auth. You may also hear it called mobile number verification or silent network authentication. So this gets back to the underlying technology of the relationship between a SIM card on a mobile device and the mobile network. What it does is it allows the mobile network operator to determine the phone number that's actually in session in this, right now, in this moment. And it's completely silent to the end user. So it is inherently phishing resistant. There's no experience that the user has to engage in to prove that they're in possession of the phone number. So highly recommend that as a method for proving possession. So the second thing is reputation. Well, okay, I've proven that I possess 5551212. How do I know I should trust that? So what are some of the common ways that phone numbers get hijacked, right? You've got SIM swap, port fraud, message forking. There's lots of different ways to kind of get in the middle of that proof of possession of the phone number. And frankly, the mobile network operators are often the ones that get attacked through social engineering to allow things like SIM swaps and port fraud. But there are signals available to help you determine if those types of events have occurred, whether services are registered with those message forking services, whether the phone has been disconnected, the tenure of the line. Is this one that was just set up last week, or is this a phone number that's been with the user for 10 years? It's a big difference in what that means to the reputation of the phone number. So between possession and reputation, what you have is a really strong authentication event, right? But we're here not to talk about just authentication. We're talking about identity binding. How do I know that that 5551212 that I just proved that you're in possession of or in control of, that I've checked the reputation of, okay, no SIM swaps or ports or disconnects, anything like that recently. Well, how do I know it belongs to you? So that's where we use other types of signals. Are you using that phone number as a proxy for yourself in high-value use cases like, your bank or for credit or other scenarios that are specifically tied to you? So you can essentially triangulate the identity of the user behind that specific phone number. So that's why this, you put it all together with possession, reputation, ownership. You have a really strong concept of who this is behind the device, and you can trust that you're interacting with them in that particular moment, which is great. And particularly when you're using mobile auth, that silent network authentication, it can end up being completely seamless to the end user. There's no pulling out a driver's license or a passport to take a photo of it and do the face scan, all that kind of stuff that adds friction and pain in your processes. So, again, I said the title of the talk is Unshackling Passkeys. The focus is on what can I now do with that? Once I have a strong sense of identity that has reduced friction, what does that open up? Well, what I get excited about is that opens up the opportunity to address, and actually I missed the session this morning on identity wallets, so I'm gonna have to go back and watch that. But it opens up enablement tech. So putting power back in the hands of people to do things like verifiable credentials and signing attributes and all that stuff that we see as the the future of mobile identity. You need to have a strong sense of who the person is behind the device in order to make that really work, especially when you're talking about things like web wallets, right? There are other use cases that are going to be pretty compelling, like low friction guest checkout, right? How many of you have gone through processes, and frankly, like, again, I'm not an Apple marketing either, but I love Apple Pay just for its ease of use. But you can do that, using a whole bunch of different services once you have a strong concept of the identity behind the device. And also things like quick apply. So I want to get credit somewhere, quickly get out the door with your passkey. So passkeys really can become foundational to some of these new capabilities that are out there. So all that to say, you can do it seamlessly, you can do it for high-value use cases, and it can really enable passkeys to become something that becomes even more ubiquitous, and we can get that billion-plus users behind it. So there you go. Thank you.
Hi, Sid Maskett from US Bank. I'm curious. I'm assuming that part of what the thinking is you guys can pull all this information at this one moment, and then you do a bind. So you can say, hey, this is the same device where we did all this stuff. Can you talk about the level of confidence difference between doing that and doing an OTP and then doing a bind?
So part of it comes down to what are you doing around the possession of the phone number. So the OTP, like I was saying, really is, am I in control of 5551212, right?
Yeah.
The challenge with OTP obviously is it's very phishable. There are lots of ways to kind of get in the middle of it. So, and I want to make sure I get the gist of the question though. So is it different between just doing an OTP and doing like the silent part of it?
Well, and think of it like this, let's assume we're doing all of the checks for ownership and all of that stuff. So it's a strong OTP, right? So what are we gaining by doing the pull the number thing as opposed to doing the OTP? Right.
So OTP specifically is, you can get in the middle of it. It can be socially engineered, all that kind of stuff. A silent network authentication, there's no user experience for a user to engage with. There's no opportunity for a fraudster to call up and say, hey, I'm your bank. What number did I just send you? That doesn't exist when you do it silently.
All right, last question. Oh, we got two more. If you could be quick just so we can get both questions in, that'd be great.
On the similar lines, I think this probably adds a great value on mobile if we are trying to create passkeys in native apps. How about browser? Like, what do we do something to bind with the phone intelligence, but I'm trying to create a passkey and use a passkey, so it also makes me bind to something before someone can use a passkey?
Yeah, I'll do that one pretty quickly. The underlying premise here, and this is why I focused on the mobile device as being the key that unlocks your digital experiences. So what you want to do is you want to create experiences that redirect the user to their mobile phone, whether that's through a link or through a QR code, however it is, because then when you're on the device, then you can actually do that seamless flow. You create the passkey, and there are lots of ways to correlate the two.
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. So the question I have is, I assume as far as our presentation goes, it was about proving the mobile, who's behind the mobile phone, right? Does it have similar support for voice channel?
That's a little tougher because the triangulation of the ownership of that, generally voice tends to go to things like landlines that are in a household, so identifying the specific user tends to be a little bit more of a challenge. But if you're going to a mobile phone, you're proving the same concept. You're in control of the mobile number, which allows you then to do those other things as well. So if you can be confident that you're sending it to a mobile device, then you can do things similarly with voice there too.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. Great questions.
You.